Após 24 anos, a força e a honra retornam ao Coliseu. Dia 14 de novembro, chega nos cinemas Gladiador 2, a sequência do longa vencedor de 5 estatuetas do Oscar, com direção de Ridley Scott e estrelado por Paul Mescal, Denzel Washington, Pedro Pascal e Joseph Quinn. Uma experiência cinematográfica épica e imperdível.
Today on CityCast Philly, Philly hasn't had this much power since 1776. We're just 4 days away from an incredibly tight presidential election, and it may very well be decided by the people of Philadelphia. It's Friday, November 1st. This is the Friday News Roundup, and you know it's about the election. I'm Trenae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. I'm here for this Friday News Roundup with Matt Katz, the executive producer of CityCast Philly. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Trenae.
And also on the show today, we're very lucky because Julia Terruso is back. Julia is a Philadelphia Inquirer political reporter who's been covering this election and many elections. Julia, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Before we get into this conversation, because it's going to be a conversation, I wanted to check in with you, Julia, because you've been busy. We all have been busy. We're all watching the news. How you doing? And how you keeping track with the polling, the candidate rallies, all the celebrities flying into Philly? How are you doing?
I'm getting a little beaten down, I'm going to be honest, but it is a moment in history that we are covering here. And I think like every voter in Philadelphia is probably feeling just inundated and a little fatigued. But yeah, it's been wild. The number of, celebrities, politicians that have been in our city, in our region. We don't have a staff big enough to cover all of them. So sometimes they're just like popping up in the wild and people are, noticing them on Instagram.
What's the state of the race at this moment? I mean, every poll I see is within the margin of error, like literally exactly tied sometimes is in Pennsylvania polls, or Trump is up by 1 or 2 and the margin of error is 3, which is still essentially a tie. So the real state of the race, and when you look at it, you see a tie, and then you drill down a little more, and you've reported on this, it's the gender gap. And that seems to be what's really defining this race nationally. And then in Pennsylvania, Trump is up by 13 among men, 13 points, and then Harris is up by 18 among women. This is a poll that you guys did with the New York Times and Siena College. So is that really sort of the underlying story here?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's not much the polls can tell us right now because every poll shows it so close. What do you do with that? But one thing that is statistically significant, poll after poll after poll, is that there is this huge lead with Harris among women, and there's this huge lead with Trump among men. And what has been very interesting is how both campaigns have responded to that or tried to work that to their advantage. Former President Trump really leans into his male base. You see that at his rallies. You see that with the kind of speeches he gives. Harris, on the other hand, has tried to kind of expand that base a little bit more. I was with her when she stopped in a barbershop in West Philly last weekend, and she's not really talking about gender or the historic nature of her candidacy the way that Hillary Clinton did. So major gender gap, but 2 very different strategies that you see both of these candidates using. And the polls actually do give us a hint into why that could be, because if you look at why people are supporting Donald Trump in Pennsylvania, men and women are actually aligned in their reasoning. It's the economy and it's immigration. If you look at why Harris's supporters are backing her, there actually is a gender gap there. For women, it is women's reproductive rights is the number one. And for men, it's the economy. So, she really does have kind of a more diverse base to appeal to, a tent to try to build.
You mean immigration and the economy, those are the big issues for him. But he's also the masculine thing is also seems to be something. I mean, you quoted this guy this week in a story who owns an auto repair shop in State College. And This guy said, once we get him in, a Trump supporter, once we get him in, I want him to have the balls to do what he said. And now, first of all, getting the phrase "the balls" on the front page of the Inquirer seems like something that would not have happened when I worked there 10 years ago. But
we did have to run it up the chain.
I believe
there were a couple editors that had to approve that.
Yeah.
I mean, it shows how our political discourse has really just changed in the Trump era. And then you contrast that with a comment that Harris made at a church in Philly, which was "Joy will cometh in the morning." So it's like joy versus balls.
It is more in your face with Donald Trump, and it always has been, even in the T-shirts his supporters wear. But for Vice President Harris's supporters, I think there is a pride and an excitement in her historic candidacy, even if she's not talking about it. It's obvious. And sort of a more maybe muted celebration of what that means. There was an ad campaign that just went up, voiced by Julia Roberts, where she's telling women, your vote is a secret, and the one place where you still have choice is in the voting booth, kind of implying that there might be some women who are resistant or even afraid of voting Democratic. And then, of course, there are supporters of hers who are loud and proud, but I think it's a little more nuanced.
I know we're talking about the gender divide here, but I'm also thinking about young voters, the young people, and just the appeal that Trump has to them. And, some say he speaks our language. He understands us. I recently read the Harvard Youth Survey, which came out this month, and it found that Harris is actually leading Trump by 28 points among voters under 30. But what is really important that I'm kind of looking at within this voting group is the survey found that they're actually influenced by their peers. So peer influence really determines how they're going to show out and turn out in the election. What do you see among young people, Julia?
I mean, this has been the podcast election, right? This has been the election where we've seen more and more focus put on reaching young people where they are on TikTok, on podcasts. Not so much the RNC, but the DNC had tons of influencers there. When it comes to young voters, I absolutely see the appeal that Trump has with some of them. You mentioned voters under 30, but I think in some surveys it shows that the younger you get, the stronger the appeal. Democrats still lead with young people, but there is kind of a divide between millennials and Gen Z. And if you look at even how young people are registering in Pennsylvania, there's been a slight dip in how many of them are registering Democratic. They're a little bit more likely to register Republican and a lot more likely to register Independent if you look at Gen Z versus millennials.
So Harris still has to get out those boomers and her boomer base. And to that end, Bruce Springsteen, John Legend, Barack Obama, they were down at the Liacouras Center on Temple, as I know you were, Julia. I was there too. The place was almost entirely filled, a lot of energy. Springsteen played 3 acoustic songs. John Legend played the piano. Obama made fun of Trump in a way Obama only can. But there were several speakers before the main bill, and the one I kept thinking about, and I was curious to get your take, Julia, was our Mayor Sherelle Parker. I have not seen her in an environment like that. She was so fired up and also so effective at firing up a crowded, large arena.
Listen, despite their race, their class, their socioeconomic status, their zip code, their religion, their sexual orientation or identity, there is a place for everybody in our town. And if we do everything that we are supposed to do, we will make sure that, one, not only does the road to the White House run through Pennsylvania, but we will make it clear when Philadelphia, Bucks, Chester, Delaware, and Monco speak, and we speak together.
Okay, I got chills. I ain't gonna lie, I got chills. I feel like, Mayor Parker, she in her own right made history in becoming the first female mayor in Philadelphia and the 100th mayor. So I feel like, this is a historic moment for her too.
I thought this was interesting. About maybe 3 weeks ago, a bunch of Democrats in Philadelphia were really starting to panic about, is the Harris campaign doing enough here? Are we going to pull this off here? And one of the things I did hear from, strategists and people in her own circle who have a reason to want to promote her, but was like, why aren't they using Parker more? Why aren't we seeing her out there more? Now, she has been at a lot of events, but I think in these final days, we're going to see, and we have seen, the Harris campaign really bringing out the mayor as often as they can, because she knows how to work a crowd. She really does. And in the final sprint to election day, you want inspiration, motivation. It's all about getting people out. So that struck me too. I think it is smart of her to mention the suburbs when she's also talking about Philadelphia.
Yeah, that was interesting too. Yeah.
Philadelphia, Bucks County, Chester, Delaware, and Montco, because they know that if we do our homework.
There is a world where Philly's turnout looks similar to 2020, but the Southeast collectively is what helps Harris win in Pennsylvania, if she wins. So it felt a little bit like she's both motivating people in the suburbs that might have come into Philly for that rally, but perhaps also couching what could happen.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, you got to get those collar counties. Harris needs those suburban Philadelphia counties. Otherwise, it's game over. So it's interesting to see whether the relatively new mayor of Philadelphia can have appeal out there. But, if anybody didn't know her before they walked into that Liacouras Center, they know her now.
More on the stories around this year's election after the break.
A Libert Seguros agora é Yellow. Tudo aquilo que já era bom continua igual. Excelência e proximidade permanecem como nossa essência. Porque não é uma mudança, é uma evolução. A Yellow está sempre em sintonia com você. É liberdade com segurança. A melhor experiência acessível a todos os clientes, iluminando cada passo da sua jornada. Deixe essa luz iluminar seu caminho. Yellow Seguradora. Seguro para viver livre. Consulte seu corretor.
Aqui no Spotify, muitas playlists são criadas através de inteligência artificial. A IA está em todo lugar, mas nem todo IA é igual. Desbloqueie experiências de IA mais inteligentes, fáceis de expandir e personalizadas para sua vida e seus negócios com os computadores Lenovo e processadores Intel Core Ultra, que transformam a sua experiência tecnológica. Acesse lenovo.com/smarter. Lenovo, inteligência artificial mais inteligente para todos.
Let's talk about the energy that's been pouring into Trump's campaign. He's been here almost as much as Harris has, mostly in the collar counties around Philly. He was actually in my hometown of Drexel Hill this week for a roundtable that was supposed to be focused on senior citizens. But Julia, your colleagues at the Inquirer said that he mostly, changed and talked about immigration. So does the anti-immigration message appeal to independent voters, those who are still not sure who to vote for?
It's a good question. I think if you're trying to reach that very narrow group of swing voters and moderate suburban voters who might be on the fence, I think the economy is what you want to be talking about. And I think you see that in some of the ads that are playing all around. But Donald Trump follows his own playbook, and he always has. And his playbook for this entire race has very much been his 2016 appeal to his base, with a lot of messaging about illegal immigration and tying that, often without evidence, to economic downturn that he connects with his supporters on. So I don't know that it is the slam dunk message for swing voters, but it is a message that he replays very loudly, and it is the message that gets his base out. So to the extent that even in Drexel Hill, MAGA was there, he could have been pumping up, his base, even in a more blue area.
And we can't forget that one of his biggest supporters has been tech billionaire Elon Musk, who is in these Philly courtrooms this week. he's actually been sued by the city's district attorney, Larry Krasner, to stop a controversial $1 million daily giveaway to entice Pennsylvania voters for Trump.
Maybe the craziest storyline, at least locally, of this election is that Elon Musk is giving people $1 million to sort of, not really, but yes, vote for Trump. It's very bizarre. Very bizarre.
Did not have it on my bingo card.
Julia, have you ever seen something like this in an election before?
No, I mean, nothing like this. And I think, again, in an unprecedented election, it was not something I saw coming. But Elon Musk, obviously, he endorsed former President Trump the day of the assassination attempt in Butler. And then he really made Pennsylvania his project. And he's been doing these $1 million giveaways if people sign these petitions in support of the First and Second Amendment. But for a while, a requirement to sign the petition was to be a registered voter. You cannot give an incentive or bribe people to register to vote in the state. So I think that's going to be the crux of what Krasner's challenging him on in Philadelphia. But the Elon Musk kind of larger presence here is just very interesting. And I do think there's a lot of overlap with supporters of Trump and Musk. And you were talking about younger voters earlier. You know, he is kind of this like cool nerd that a lot of young Trump supporters really idolize. So,
do people bring him up? Do voters bring him up to you on the campaign trail, like at Trump rallies? I mean, I saw an interview that Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman did with the New York Times this week, and he said Musk is what scares him most about the election, that Musk, more than any other endorsement possible, has really influenced the race, at least here in Pennsylvania. Do people talk about him?
I've heard people bring him up to kind of validate supporting Trump, you know, to sort of say, hey,
Trump can't be an irresponsible vote if the richest, most successful man in the world supposedly supports him, right?
Exactly. Yes, I've heard it in that context. And, you know, you can also just see that Elon Musk is filling some of these spaces where he's doing these giveaways, because he'll like speak for, 25 minutes or so and then bring out the big check. And he's drawing crowds.
Now, I mean, while both candidates, we've been talking about this, Harris and Trump have been spending a lot of time in our region. I mean, what differences are you seeing in the rallies and who shows up and what actually is being said?
So in the final weeks of this election, I think we saw Vice President Harris at first really hammer the Trump is a threat to democracy. She pointed to people who've worked with him, calling him a fascist. Honestly, kind of the President Biden playbook of like the anti-Trump, he is a threat messaging. I think we've seen a little bit more as we get even closer to Election Day of her also talking about her plans, the economy, kind of, again, trying to go back to that first conversation we were having about the gender gap, trying to pull together a coalition of people who will be motivated by different things. For the former president, I think we've seen a lot of the same, a lot of the kind of dark imagery about what he says America will become under Harris. The Madison Square Garden rally was platforming racism and the sort of sound bites that you typically don't want in the last days of the election. And yet, poll after poll shows they're running neck and neck. So I think it's a strategy that's worked for Trump before, and he's sticking to it. And for Harris, she knows she has to expand her base. As for who's at these rallies, I think they are mostly speaking to the people who are already going to vote for them. But one thing I like to remind people and myself of is those people are going to go home and there's going to be somebody who lives in their house, or they're going to mention it to a neighbor. So even the effect of going and doing these in-person events, I do think is valuable, especially for voters who are just getting inundated on TV and with mail to their doorsteps,
And those texts, the freaking texts.
And those texts.
The worst.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they are having two completely different conversations. I mean, I imagine the topics that are brought up at a Trump rally versus a Harris rally are just so dramatically different. What then does the path to victory for Harris at this moment look like, Julia? Is it about getting out her base of liberal and black voters in Philly? Is it about convincing Puerto Ricans in Philly that Trump looks down on them after that remark at the Madison Square Garden rally about Puerto Rico being a floating island of garbage. What is her plan, and what does she envision the path to look like when it specifically comes to Pennsylvania and Philly?
I know this is a complicated answer, but there's a lot of different paths. I think turnout in Philadelphia, absolutely. She's made a real push for Republicans for Harris in the suburbs. If enough of those Nikki Haley voters, when they get into the booth, just say, I can't vote for Trump, that could be the difference maker. If what happened in 2022 when abortion rights were really on the ballot inspires all of these women who are already backing her in higher numbers, that could be the difference maker. And yes, given Trump won by 44,000 votes in 2016, if enough Puerto Rican voters in the state were offended enough by that comment, that could make a difference too. So, it's not one path, and that's why you see she's not camping out in one place. She's kind of having to go all over.
When we come back, we're chatting about the Senate race and what's the last weekend looking like before the Election Day.
Quer desenvolver os talentos da sua equipe e potencializar os resultados da sua empresa? Conte com a expertise do atendimento corporativo do Senac São Paulo, que já capacitou mais de 1 milhão de pessoas e profissionais de instituições públicas, privadas e terceiro setor. Construa uma equipe altamente motivada e capacitada e destaque-se no mercado. Entre em contato, acesse sp.senac.br/corporativo e saiba mais. Quer saber? Senac.
I am curious, just to touch base here on the Senate race. Bob Casey, the incumbent, relatively popular Democratic senator from the state of Pennsylvania, seemed like he was cruising to victory a few months ago. Like, I was looking at the polls in the summer, and it was a comfortable lead. This looked like another Casey victory in Pennsylvania. And now the polls indicate the race is tied. Like, it literally just looks totally tied. Maybe not as tied as Trump-Harris, but pretty tied. Do we understand yet, Julia, like what happened, how Casey potentially lost this thing, dropped the ball here?
So from the beginning, when those polls came out showing, Casey up 8, Casey up 9, I thought it was interesting that Casey's own campaign and Casey himself was saying, we expect it to get a lot tighter. And that's exactly what happened. So I think part of it is this is Pennsylvania in 2024. The state was won by 1.2 percentage points in 2020 and by less than a percentage point in 2016. Races are close here. And then I think the other thing is you have to give some credit to Dave McCormick, the Republicans' campaign. He's got a lot of money, much of it coming from a super PAC that's backing him. And he's really managed to run a race where he kind of presents as a slightly more moderate Republican, but then he's also, I don't think he's missed a Trump rally in Pennsylvania. So he's got kind of the entirety of the Republican Party behind him. And in a close state, that can push you over the edge. Now, I also think if there's one silver lining for Casey, it's that in some of those early polls, we saw that gap indicated there were some Trump Casey voters, far fewer Harris McCormick voters. So are some of those voters still around, still deciding, or have they decided they're out on Casey and they're just voting Republican down ballot? We'll see. But I think it's why, Casey's running ads talking about how he supported some of Trump's tariffs and didn't support some of Biden's moves to ban new fracking sites. So clearly, Casey, I think, knows that to pull this off, he's going to have to get some Trump supporters, unless the presidential race winds up being not as close as it looks.
Right. And then he can fly in those coattails. And he was at the rally the other day, too. Casey was, the Obama Springsteen.
He introduced Springsteen.
That's right.
I know that in, political conversations, there's polls, there's like a scientific way to talk about all this. But if you drive on Henry Avenue in Philly, I noticed that in the median, there's a bunch of Trump and Dave McCormick signs. And then you see the vast difference on Ridge Avenue where there's Harris walls and Casey signs. So if that will tell me anything I need to know is that it is really neck to neck. But another big race that we're also watching is within the attorney general race in Pennsylvania. The richest man in the state, Jeffrey Yaz, isn't running, but he has his hands and his wallet in this statewide race. We're talking like millions of dollars, right, of influence coming from TV ads. I'm just trying to figure out, Julia, why does he care about the state's top prosecutor job?
So Jeffrey has played in Pennsylvania politics for some time now, and it looks like this year is no different. There's a lot of power that an attorney general has that could, wind up determining certain things he's interested in the state. But we also know that that's a position that can lead you to being governor. I mean, look at Josh Shapiro's trajectory. I have not covered that race as closely, so I might not have the best answer for you there.
But it's interesting that if you're a donor and you sort of get behind a guy early on who's running for attorney general, that person, as you said, could be governor within the decade, right? I mean, that is what happened to Josh Shapiro. So it is has become a launching pad for higher office. So if you're a donor who wants influence, it's a kind of a good bet, I guess.
Yeah. And with so many eyeballs on the presidential election and so much money being sucked up by it, you can make an impact in those down ballot races if you put your money behind the person you want sometimes. So,
and attorney general is also involved in everything, including potentially elections, right? I mean, could the attorney general be in the hot seat if we don't necessarily know what's going on with the election? And
that's a good point.
There's court challenges related to how the elections were run.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That was part of what Shapiro ran on when he became governor, was protecting the state's election in 2020.
Can we talk about what's going to happen after Election Day before we let you go, Julia? Because me and Trenae have been talking about this.
Sure.
We saw what happened in 2020.
We saw people roll up to the convention center with assault rifles. We saw protests in the streets. We saw all kinds of shenanigans. And it was nerve-wracking then, right? And now the race appears even closer. And we know we're not going to have the results on election night, it seems. It seems impossible. Thursday, maybe Friday, who knows? How worried are you, Julia, about what happens, what Philadelphia looks like next Wednesday, next Thursday, next Friday, if we don't have a convincing winner?
I'm anxious. I do think we've all lived through that. And so if I'm hopeful about anything, it's that expectations are a little more managed this time. The elected officials have had 4 years under their belts kind of trying to work out some of these kinks. So unless it is a, super, super, super close race, I think we will know earlier than we did last time. But, we're already seeing, as people try to vote early by mail, a lot of confusion and long lines that has led to, claims of voter suppression or interference. And that, I think, is only going to ramp up, unfortunately. But yeah, it's going to be a high pressure week. And I think in 2020, the courts did their jobs and election administrators did their jobs. And the vote ultimately was registered and counted. And we found out who the winner was. But we'll see what this year brings.
Well, Trump did tweet this week something really interesting, claiming that there's already cheating in our state. He's laying the groundwork to contest the race. So why is that part of his strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it was part of his strategy in 2020. And I think we didn't talk that much about the Electoral College map, but Harris likely really needs Pennsylvania. And Trump may need it too, but she might need it more. So blocking her here is really his best chance. And so anything that could stand in his way of that, he's trying to sow distrust and fear. And there's a lot of minutia in how elections are run, how registrations are verified. And it really takes a little bit to look into what's being claimed and what actually happened. But I have not seen any evidence of rampant voter suppression or fraud or interference in the lead up to this election.
And the Democratic and Republican election officials have also said the same. Everything's going smoothly, and there isn't voter fraud in any real way in any election. But that doesn't necessarily stop the former president from spouting that and using a social media platform. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I just hope that even if we don't have a winner by Wednesday, I just hope the commercials stop. I mean, and I don't necessarily know they will, but you reported the campaigns have spent $538 million on advertising in Pennsylvania. That was the number as of like last week.
And that's just the presidential. If you include Senate and Congress, it's close to $1 billion.
Just in our state.
In Pennsylvania, yes.
I know so many other ways that money could be used.
Right?
The ad I want most to stop is the Kamala is for them, Donald Trump is for you. I unfortunately watch a lot of sports, and I've watched the baseball playoffs and the World Series and Eagles games. And I've watched this ad with my 9-year-old son now, like literally hundreds of times. It's just like dark and angry and this hodgepodge of like supposedly scary words like taxpayer funded sex changes, prisoners, illegal aliens, liberal media. And it's just unsettling. And I want it all over.
Yeah, especially if you have the little kids around, like, oh my God, it just irritates me. It really does.
Forget that you might have to explain some things you don't want to talk about with your kids. It's this idea that this is a major issue that affects a lot of people that I almost find so off-putting. I'd rather hear about things that actually affect the lives of the American people.
Yeah, it's interesting they've dumped so much money into that one, because I think the focus on culture war, anti-LGBTQ issues hasn't necessarily proven to be effective in the past. You know, I think the most effective ad that the Trump campaign has right now is the clip of Harris saying she wouldn't do much different than Biden did, because what we hear in poll after poll is that people want to change. People are down on the economy, blame that on Biden. And so I think that's how you shift the voter who's like, I don't really like Donald Trump, but I'm really upset with my grocery bill.
Sure. Yeah, the groceries are a
more
thing.
Than the scary they, them one. But I'm not a political strategist. I'm just a political reporter. So we'll see.
Listen, I have been trying to watch all of the like pumpkin bake-offs and,
Ooh, good palate cleanser for what's going on.
But then it was the commercial with Natasha Stoyanov, who was talking about the really disgusting sexual assault allegations against Trump. Now, converting that into an attack ad has been completely jarring. And I'm just like, oh my God, kids, like cover your ears. Cause like, I don't want to necessarily talk about that with them right now. You know what I'm saying? So,
well, and I've actually interviewed some voters who are survivors and who say that some of those ads can be really triggering and disturbing, especially when they're just playing over and over and you can't turn them off.
The bar for what can be played on our TV during elections has lowered so much. This is a Kamala Harris ad. In the ad, curses are bleeped twice. I can't even imagine there being a Barack Obama ad where there's like intentional cursing written into the script.
Philly Tough is different. They insult us.
Bad things happen in Philadelphia. Bad things.
They don't like us. We don't care. Because here's the thing that people like Donald Trump don't understand. We're Philly. F***ing Philly. And when you fight us, we fight back. From 1776 to 4th and 26th. So go ahead. Talk whatever you want, Donald. We're voting soon. And when it comes to freedom, Philly's undefeated.
Trump presents as the tough guy who's going to take on the world leaders and defend America. And
Philly's tougher. Like we're tougher.
Right.
Democrats are trying to play in that arena and
co-opt
be like,
that language. Yeah.
Hey, tough guy, we've got a home for you too. I do like from 1776 to 4th and 26th, but the rest of that ad could get toned down.
So what is this weekend looking like on the campaign trail, Julia?
It's looking busy. So we have President Biden is going to Scranton, which is a visit that holds a lot of significance. He's been kind of kept at an arm's distance from Harris during this campaign as she tries to run her own race and, show that she'll be a fresh start. But he's got a legacy on the line, and I think he's been eager to get out onto the campaign trail. So he's going to Scranton. Former First Lady Michelle Obama will be in the Philadelphia area. She's a big draw for Democrats, seen as someone who can really get the vote out. The former President Trump, I believe, is due back in the state, although I have not gotten confirmation on where, but he also has surrogates kind of fanning all around. Just heard that Allen Iverson and Kevin Garnett are doing something for the Democrats. So the celebrity parade and the politician parade will continue. And then, of course, there's already construction in front of the Art Museum.
Yeah, I saw that.
We are hearing that the eve of the election, Harris will have a big rally on the Parkway.
With Taylor Swift?
I don't know. The speculation runs wild. Will it be Beyonce? Will Bad Bunny come? I was at the GNC the night that we thought Beyonce was going to come out. And then she was introduced by North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. And we all looked around like, what happened to Beyonce? So I would suggest people keep their expectations in check. Also with the election, because it's a 50-50 race and we don't know what's going to happen.
Totally true.
Julia, thank you so much for joining us on CityCast Philly.
Of course.
Thanks, Julia. Good luck out there this weekend. I hope you get some rest in between it all, and we'll be following your reporting.
That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Our executive producer is Matt Katz. Our producers are Abby Fritz and Selena Say Reynolds. Our Hey Philly newsletter editor is Ava Wanowski. And our host is me, Trenae Nuri. Music is by Philly's own Interminable, with additional music from All the Kimonos. If you enjoyed this episode about the presidential race and some of the other statewide races that we're all looking at, tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and make sure you're subscribed. And click on the Hey Philly link in the show notes under today's episode to sign up for the Hey Philly email newsletter. We've got you covered on everything from the latest election news to what to do this weekend in Philly. We'll be back here Monday morning with another important show on the election. Have a great weekend and be safe, y'all. Bye.